This is a brief introduction video talking about my latest game called Afterglow. Afterglow is a game of hyperlight space combat set in the very far future. So, what kind of game is Afterglow? It's meant to be a spaceship game, but it's very different from the typical space combat games that you'll see where it's fleet combat that tend to be oriented around maneuvering ships in a way that puts one another into the desired arcs. And the ships kind of grind past each other and wear each other's defenses down over time. They're exchanging volleys of fire. A lot of the time there's little fighter craft and stuff that interdict one another. This is nothing like that. There's no slow-moving, inertia-based movement systems. There's not a lot of worrying about what speed a given ship is at. There's no maneuver charts or anything like that. The core conceit of Afterglow is this is happening far enough in the future that the technology has evolved to the point where we don't have to worry about even relativity for the most part. Any ship can be equipped with a faster-than-light drive, a hyperlight drive, that will enable it to cross the entire board in a single action. Even with their impulse drives that are moving slower than light, they can move really far, and they're not concerned at all about turning radiuses or even being subject to gravity. All of the ships are manned by AI cores that are a fusion of an alien supercomputer and a human consciousness. So there's nobody on there that we have to worry about turning into red paste. And all the technology is advanced enough that it's not particularly worried about crushing itself. Instead, what it has to worry about is other ships and making a miscalculation and flying into an object or through a debris field that it didn't know was there. So what do I mean by that? In Afterglow, time isn't necessarily linear. Instead, the combat is happening so quickly that the only thing that keeps one ship from destroying one another is their ability to look into the extremely near future and project their own destruction and then actually move backwards through time and space through a wake that they've made in space-time using faster-than-light travel. It kind of creates fluxes in space-time. So when a ship is destroyed, as long as it's moved enough times at hyperlight speeds, it'll actually predict its own destruction and then move back through time to a safer location. But it can only do that so many times before it's ultimately destroyed. The other noteworthy thing here is that there's no armor on any of these ships. The weapon systems are so sophisticated that all they need to do is find one another and there's no protection. The most basic weapon will destroy any ship in the game in a single hit unless it has enough of an afterglow effect, which is the name for moving back in space through time. moving So the only defense that ships have against one another's very sophisticated weaponry is called the Afterglow effect. And that's when a ship moves backwards through time and space to a previous location that it had been through hyperlight travel, which is represented by these little discs. I'll do a demonstration in a moment. So effectively, these AI cores are able to look a very short distance into the future, see that they're about to be destroyed, and either they just don't perform the move that would put them in the position where they're killed, or they actively move back through time. Now, all the combat in this game is also happening in an extremely short period of time, basically imperceptible to the human brain. That's how advanced the combat's supposed to be. If you've read the book Light, it's supposed to be very similar to the K-ship combat. That was a big inspiration for this game. So, what type of game is it in a more general sense? It's essentially a skirmish war game that's played on a two-dimensional plane using objects, using templates to signify where they are for terrain, and then little ship markers to signify where your craft are, and the craft are the ones that engage one another in combat. The most ships you'll ever control in a game of Afterglow are 3, regardless of the point cost that you're playing at. It plays really fast, and that's because it uses a timed element. So I use this app called Turns Timer, but you can just use Chess Clock. But games of Afterglow are, because of this, fast. You have to make your decisions quickly on the clock. There is pressure. Now, you don't have to play with the clock. I've included rules for it if you don't like playing with this, but it totally changes the game and the experience. I'm not saying it's better or worse one way or another. I certainly prefer it with the clock, and everything in the game is designed with the clock in mind, just so that everybody knows. But it's perfectly playable without it, using the alternate rules that are included in the rulebook. So if you don't want to mess with the chess clock, you don't have to. You can play with those rules. But it really does change the way that the game feels. I strongly recommend trying it with the chess clock. So, why would you play this game over something else? I actually like most of the spaceship games that are on the market right now. I really like Drop Fleet and I also really like Full Thrust. They're excellent games, but they're not really anything like this. A big thing you'll notice is that other than these spin down dice, which aren't really dice because they're not randomizers, there's no randomizers. Everything that you do is your own decision, and the outcomes are based on what you've decided to do and what your opponents decide to do at a given time. So you can't get screwed or blessed by dice or a deck of cards or anything like that. Basically, everything comes down to your own decisions. Another thing is that the game's centered around extremely high lethality and prediction. So if you don't like trying to get inside your opponent's head and figuring out what they're going to do next, if you kind of get into a groove and do the same thing over and over again, you're going to lose a lot in this game. So Afterglow has customizable ships. It uses these cards, but it's a carefully curated range of options. So it's not a giant sprawling list of upgrades you have. Like, for example, when I play Star Wars Armada, I literally have a binder full of cards that you can flip through, and it's just endless options and things for players to memorize. Whereas in Afterglow, there's 5 hulls, which are these big cards here that are the foundation of a ship, and then there's 24 other systems, and that's it. There's no other options. So there's lots of ways to build a ship, but with a little bit of playing, players will very quickly understand what all of the options are. It doesn't take very long to learn them. Another big feature with Afterglow is a lot of the time in space games, so here's your planet. If that's in play, all it represents a lot of the time is don't fly your ships past it or over it. Sometimes they're objectives, but they don't do a whole lot. Whereas in Afterglow, all of these exert a lot of influence on the way a game is played because most things are destructible. So even the smallest ship, it's trivially easy for it to fire some kind of relativistic munition at this planet and then destroy it. And when it's destroyed, it'll create a template either behind it or somewhere where the munition impacts it. It becomes a debris field that kills everything that's in the debris field when it's created. And it also prohibits faster than light travel through that debris field. The other thing that most of the celestial bodies do, like similar with this radiation cloud, is it makes it so that it's easier to target things that are in front of it because they're imprinting against the background radiation that it's creating. Also, another big thing in this game is in the pre-game phase, all the terrain is drafted, so players have a lot of influence on where the obstacles are placed inside the battlefield. So those are the differentiating aspects of Afterglow compared to other games. But the biggest one overall to me, and with everybody that I've tested it with, is that it's just very different from the other options that are available right now. So if you're looking for something a bit spicier that's also relatively cheap to play and doesn't require a lot of infrastructure, because you really don't need much, you just need some cutouts. You don't need ship miniatures. There's included little tokens that you can use to play, and those are perfectly fine. As long as you're willing to do maybe an hour of cutting things out, you're able to play Afterglow for dirt cheap. So that's the overall impression. It plays very fast. It's very lethal. Your decisions are what decide whether you win or lose, and it's very different from anything else available in the genre. So that's kind of an overview. I'm going to jump into the interface of the game now, where I'm going to explain how players move their ships around and what makes that different from other games. Alright, so I've kind of got a very basic training scenario set up here. So I've got my frigate floating around in space. He's not doing anything in particular right now. His signature is going to be 0, and we have this one planet here. So in Afterglow, we use something called the death clock to represent the fact that despite that we've entered this future where we can move at hyperlight speeds around the universe almost at will, unfortunately, it's also provoked a very strong response from some unknown force, presumably aliens, that don't like the fact we're doing this. And they're very good at finding us and killing us. So any time that we spend outside of these safe zones that have been created, we're under constant threat of being destroyed by these aliens, and there's no real known counter to it. So the longer that your ships spend moving around, the more likely that they are to be destroyed. So to represent that in Afterglow, when you're placing these action markers during what's called the computing phase, there's a clock running. So how that works is you put a marker down, and then you switch this clock to your opponent. Anytime that you're putting a marker down, this clock is running until you have them all down, and then you stop it. And then once your opponent's done, he stops his, and then you resolve the counters that have been placed out in play. But if your counter runs out, if the timer runs out while you're placing counters, one of your ships gets destroyed. And there's no protection against that. So you have to balance making fast decisions and processing the information quickly versus making good decisions, which is very challenging. You can make the clock more or less generous depending on how much you want to emphasize this, but the default settings I suggest actually put quite a bit of pressure on the players, because that's what I want. I don't want a game where people are constantly under analysis paralysis. It's meant to emphasize the fact that people are making snap decisions under a great deal of pressure, with not only their opponent threatening them, but also a force that they can't quite understand. The other thing that that does is makes games quick. Most games of Afterglow, even with a lot of points, with big, sophisticated ships, last maybe a half hour to 45 minutes once the players are familiar with the rules, and the rules don't take much to get familiar with. The core rules are about 15 pages if you take out all the fancy diagrams and things like that. Everything else after that just makes the game easier to understand, and there's one table that I recommend you have in play, or available while you're playing, sorry, which is the obstacles table. But you'll very quickly learn what all the different obstacles do, because there's not that many of them anyway. But each of them, it tends to be quite different. So, to quickly demonstrate the death clock here, I'm going to run the death clock, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this ship around the planet as though I was playing a round of Afterglow. So I don't need my opponent's marker here, because I don't have an opponent in this round. So if I was playing by myself, I'm going to be the only person with the death clock, which really changes the emphasis of it. Now, speaking of playing by yourself, I do have a solitaire version of this game called Outer Dark that uses an AI to simulate another race of aliens that we've bumped into that are decidedly very hostile to us, and you can fight them without any need from human input. So if you're a solo player, like I am a lot of the time, unfortunately, so if you're someone that likes solitaire gaming, there's an entire module for you that I'll talk about later. So right now, I'm just going to take this frigate and I'm going to move it around the planet. It's going to take a couple of moves, because I don't want to smash through the planet using my faster than light movement. Now I can move through it using my slower than light movement. That's not a big deal. But I'm just going to demonstrate how creating an FTL wake here works. So here we go. The timer's running. The aliens are looking for me. I'm going to move here with my vector drive. So I use drive token. This is my first action for the frame. Then let's take another move over here using my impulse engines to keep my signature lower, because the impulse engine generates no signature. And then let's jump over here. I'm done. I stop the death clock. So I've got these 3 tokens in play. And then at the start of the kinetic phase, which is where we resolve all the actions that we've assigned our ships, we reveal these tokens when it's their time. So in a round, there's 3 frames. That's why there's 3 tokens. And inside each frame, there's a couple of steps. And the steps are the order in which the actions are resolved. So first, it would be countermeasures, which we don't have any. Then we have move. So we reveal our first move. It's this drive here. It's faster than light because it's moving more than 6 inches. The frigate, that's the fastest it can move slower than light. So I'm going to take this token and put it here. I can put that anywhere adjacent to this drive token, and then I'm going to move my frigate onto its new location, leaving behind its old location marker because I move faster than light. If my ship gets destroyed now, it's generated a bit of signature by making that jump, but the benefit is now if it's destroyed, it can move back through space-time to this previous safe location and it'll still be alive. So that was the first frame. So then we move on to our second frame, which is again drive, but this time we're within 6 inches of our current position, so it's going to be a slower than light move. So I actually pick up the ship and the location marker it's currently on and put it anywhere adjacent to this marker. And it doesn't gain any signature. So the benefit of the impulse drive is it's kind of stealthy. If you want to keep your signature low, sneak around, sneak up on enemy ships and attack them, that's kind of it's very important, those incremental moves. And then we're in the third frame, and this is the final one. We know it's a drive, but this one is a lot farther than 6 inches away. So I'm going to take another one of these markers and put it into play anywhere adjacent to that order indicator and jump to that new location. And my signature is now up to 8. And that's an entire round played. So now I've got these 3 location markers, one underneath my ship marker, and then 2 just floating in space. Now the frigate only has 3 location markers. So what happens if I perform another jump? Well, let's see. Let's play another round. I start the death clock. All done. So our first frame is a drive, and I'm making an FTL jump, but I don't have any more free markers. They're all in play. So what happens now, there's a sequence with which you use these markers. You use ones that are not in the battle zone yet, And then you use ones that are in the battle zone but are not underneath your ship's location marker. So you're kind of leapfrogging at this point between these location markers. And I can choose any of them, whichever one I want to use. So I'm going to take the one on the far side of the planet and jump it over here and complete that jump. And my signature goes up to 12 because it's 4 every time that I jump. And the reason that it's 4 is because the vector drive has a signature gain of the ship's hull, and the frigate's hull was 4. And then my second action is an impulse drive to here, and my third is an impulse drive to here. So that's 2 rounds of the game. Now let's say I'd done this. So what happens here? Well, when I reveal that, the jump is going to happen, so I still have to take one of these markers and move it anywhere adjacent to here, and then my ship has to try to jump to this location. So to do this, I have to be able to create a line between its current location and the new location. But unfortunately, any line that I draw, now I can make some tricky lines. I can go from the very far edge to the other very far side of that token, that kind of stuff, but all the lines cross this template that represents this planet's gravitational field and mass. And there's no way that I can avoid it. So, unfortunately, my ship's going to get to here, and then it's going to collide with this planet, and there's going to be a relativistic collision, which destroys both my ship and the planet. So when this collision occurs, and we know it's happening, my ship is going to be destroyed. But fortunately, I have an FTL wake. I have a couple locations that I can jump to. Now, the ship gets to here, but it becomes destroyed when it's at its new location. So I'm going to lose that location marker. This one's gone for the rest of the game. And I still gain the signature from the action I took that killed me. And now I have to choose one of my locations to Afterglow back to. So I'm going to go back to this guy here. So all that's happened is I've gained 4 signature, and I'm down 1 location marker. And this planet is also destroyed. So it gains a destroyed marker. Now you can use pretty much anything for that, but again, there's tokens in the sorry, you probably can't see that, but there's tokens inside the package for destroyed. The other thing that destroying this planet does, because it's a gas giant, is it actually reduces the death clock by 15 seconds. So destroying this object has really drawn the attention of whatever these hostile aliens are that are destroying human craft. And it's made them more likely to find you in the near future. But let's change things up a bit. Let's say that I'm a really bad navigator, and instead of colliding with a gas giant, I collide with the small planet here. So obviously this is a pretty small footprint, but so what happens when I collide with it is it becomes destroyed. Now the reason that these destruction markers are important is because something can only be destroyed once per game, but when this planet gets destroyed, then I take one of these debris field markers and I can put it anywhere so that it's overlapping the center of this template. And now this counts as a debris field obstacle in play as well, so it's like creating an asteroid field. And let's say there was an enemy ship that was lurking behind here. Well, when that debris field gets created, if that ship is overlapped by it, it will be destroyed as well. So then it'll either have to afterglow or it'll be removed from play as a destroyed ship. So destroying terrain is a big thing in this game. You want to leverage it to hide behind and keep yourself from getting shot, spend some time reducing your signature, but hiding behind things is not safe in this environment at all. So that was a very basic demonstration of how to use action markers and the death clock. So now I'm going to play a very short demonstration game where I'm going to have 2 identical ships of frigate. They're both frigate classes and they both have all the same armament. And I'm going to do a demonstration game to show how the death clock works and how a game actually looks when it's being played. Now I have a very limited play space here that the camera can fit, so it's going to look a little weird compared to a full game where you have a lot more maneuverability. But I think it'll give you an idea of how the game is supposed to look and how it plays. So now that I've covered the basics of the game's interface, I'm just going to play a very simple demonstration round, or maybe 2 or 3 rounds, of what a game of Afterglow actually looks like. So this is going to use the timer. We've got a red ship and a blue ship. They have identical loadouts, so when we start the game, it's important to note there's nothing on the board. The ships actually have to move onto the board from outside at the very beginning of the game. So you have a totally blank slate at the beginning, and then the initiative player makes the first move. That's determined by some of the other rules. You can have a look at that when you look into the game further. Okay, here we go. So I start the death clock, and then the red ship has to make a move. And the likelihood is that they're going to move onto the board, but they don't have to. placed, then the clock is switched again. Now I'm putting the markers down in sequential order here, but you don't actually have to do that. You can put them down in any order that you want. So now that the red player has placed down all of their action markers, they have to make a choice about declaring if they're going to lock their clock or leave it open. So if you lock your clock, what that means is you're not going to get to pick up any more of these tokens. You can't touch them anymore. That means that the next player, when the clock switches to them, they can pick up one of their markers, and then they have to put down all of their markers. So even if I had 4 markers left, let's say I had these 2, plus I had another ship with 3 markers of its own, I can pick up 1 more at the most, and then I have to put the rest of them down in sequence. So the red player is going to lock their timer, and then it's going to be the blue player's clock active again. Here we go. And he's going to lock. That's it. We're done for the round. So then we go through the sequence of the 3 frames. And within the 3 frames, there's a bunch of steps that reveal the actions at different rates. So first is countermeasures, of which there's none. Then movement. So I've got a drive movement here. Now you reveal which action you're taking when that step comes up in the player order. So the red player is the initiative player, and he's just going to come into play right here. Now I'm going to choose to come into play from this table edge, using my slower than light movement, because that won't generate any extra signature. So I'm going to keep this ship relatively stealthy and just walk in from there. Now I don't know how easily you can see that, but the blue player is using a drive action, and this is going to actually use the vector drive. So moving more than 6 inches, he's going to come kind of into the middle of the board there, a much more aggressive play. But because he's using faster than light movement, he gets to place a location marker anywhere on the edge of the board. Now, I don't know exactly where the edges show up on the camera, so we're going to use this location here as the board edge that he used the vector drive to jump in from, and he's going to gain 4 signature. So then we move to frame 2, and I've already forgotten what the different ships are doing. Okay, so countermeasures is revealed first, and the blue player has a countermeasures action. That's going to bring the signature down of the blue ship by 3. And the red ship is using a slower than light drive move. Comes to there. And then frame 2 is finished. So then we go to the 3rd. And again, I've already forgotten what the ships are doing. Okay, so the first action is this drive, slower than light. Comes to here. Now, this can be placed anywhere adjacent. So there's actually quite a bit of movement flexibility. But because I know the order in which the actions are resolved, I know that this is either a weapon action or it's sensor action. I'm not too worried about either, so I want to get relatively close. I'm going to end the movement there. And then it is a weapon action. It's within 2 inches of this ship, so it's going to be the pinpoint laser. But the pinpoint laser has a range of 0 plus the target's signature. Now, with that ship only having a signature of 1, it's well over 1 inch of distance, so the shot misses because it can't find a target, and it costs this ship 4 signature. So as you can see, if he hadn't used a countermeasures action there, he would have shot this ship and destroyed it. So there's quite a bit of bluffing related to where you put your action markers, because a big thing is the countermeasures action marker can be placed anywhere on the board to kind of masquerade as a different type of action, but then all it does is reduce your signature most of the time unless you have a specific system. So that was it. That was the end of a single round. So at the end of this round, the ships are in knife fighting distance here. And the red guy has 4 signature, and the blue guy has 1 signature. And then we're going to restart the death clock, and the blue player is up first. Here we go. And switch. So this is important. I don't like this piece of information. I don't know what he's going to do, but I don't like it. I'm going to take this token away, and then that switches my clock again. So as you can see, it can make things a bit complicated when you can take the tokens away, but that kills quite a bit of time on the clock. So you only have so long to do these things, and every time you pick a token up, a token that you laid in the past can now be invalid and not what you want anymore. The red player is going to lock. Okay, so the blue player is locked, so that's it. So then we resolve these tokens in sequence. So we've got a drive, so that's going to be faster than light. Now, as long as there's a path between this marker's current location, a straight line, I should use the laser, but I don't want to get it up. I don't want to get up. So there's obviously a straight line between these two. So this can go anywhere that you can draw a straight line, even if it cuts very, very close to the planet. As long as you can draw a straight line between these two anywhere, because this is a sort of an abstraction of the ship's position in space, there's actually quite a bit of wiggle room along this path. He's going to jump to here and increase his signature. And the blue ship, likewise, is going to perform a drive slower than light. So he's going to pick up his entire base and move to there. So then the two actions, countermeasures, reduce this ship's signature down to 5. Okay, and then the blue ship is using a weapon action. This is going to be the relativistic launcher. So he's going to fire a flechette canister. Now this thing has to have itself pointing in a path that will overlap this ship's center and this action marker. So let's point it in this direction. And then the final step of the round moves the munitions that are in play, like this canister. So the canister is going to move 10 inches, which I think is going to put it just, yep. So it's going to directly impact the red ship as it moves. So I'm not even going to have to detonate it to try to overlap. Yes. So this moves in a straight line. It ends up hitting this ship, and then this ship is destroyed. And it uses the afterglow effect to move back to here through time and space. And then it loses that location marker. This ship canister is destroyed, and this ship's signature went up to 7 when it fired the relativistic launcher. And that's it. So now this is a new location, but unfortunately that can really mess with the location of your old markers. So this ship used countermeasures and went down to 4 signature. But now this ship was expecting a nice, easy jaunt at slower than light speeds over to here. But that is not the case. Now, because it had to go back in time to save itself, its previous order is disastrous because there's no safe path around the planet. The ship is going to collide with it, and it has a new location marker it will place here because it's a faster than light movement. So when it does that jump, it moves to there, but it's destroyed by moving into the planet. So it has to perform the afterglow effect and move back to its previous location. Its signature still goes up by 4, but now this planet has been destroyed. Now this ship's controller can choose to put this template anywhere that they want as long as it overlaps the center of the planet's position template. So let's just put it here to try to cut off some of this ship's escape routes. Now they're at very close distance again as the round ends. And it is the blue player's activation first, and they have roughly equivalent amounts of time on the clock. But the big difference here, oh, he lost that, is that the red ship has no location markers left, and the blue one has one on the board, and then one that still has not even been into play. So the blue ship has a lot of advantages here right now. Ooh. Okay, here we go. The blue player's going to lock, and so is the red player. That's it. So then we resolve these the same way as we've been doing before. So this player is going to use a fast and light jump to this location, but they have no more location markers free. There's only the one of the ship, so they have to move the whole arrangement over to here and increase their signature by 13. Now, I will say it's a little awkward to play this game against yourself because a lot of it is based around prediction. Obviously, I'm mostly just trying to demonstrate the mechanics here. But, like I said, there is... Oh! Abandoned ship. There is a solo module that plays with a full AI, so the human player doesn't have to make any decisions at all. So, we're into frame 2. Both ships are executing drives. So the red ship is really running up its signature by making these drives in an effort to escape the other ship. So that's where you have to eventually make a bold choice, right? You have to either sit still and use your countermeasures, or you have to start counterattacking. Because otherwise you end up in this kind of trap where you're just running away and building up the signature while the other ship, obviously as you're seeing using the slower than light moves, is not increasing its signature whatsoever. So here we finally use some countermeasures. And in this instance, so the blue ship did think it was going to be able to use a weapon to reach this guy, but there's no straight path that doesn't overlap an obstacle, and the laser is stopped by any kind of obstacle, including the debris field. So he fires and increases his signature up to 8. And that's the end of that round, and then we start a new one, and here we go. Let's see what happens here. And I'm going to have to be quick here. I didn't make it. Okay. So the red player's timer ran out. So what happens there is the alien presence that the human race doesn't understand just destroys one of the red player's ship because their timer ran out. The aliens have found them. This ship gets destroyed and it has no location markers anywhere else that it can perform the afterglow effect to go back to. So the ship is just destroyed and the red player loses. So the blue player comfortably won that game where I knew what both ships were doing in a double-blind prediction-based game just to demonstrate the mechanics like destroying a planet, firing weapons at each other, how the ranges work, that kind of stuff. So not the ideal illustration of how the game works, but I hope it gives you some sense of how the game plays when you have human opponents. And again, there's a full Solitaire game as well called Outer Dark that uses the basic rules, but the way that the alien spacecraft play is totally independent of your inputs. Instead, it uses some dice as a randomizer to make an action based on a chart that has modifiers that are changed by the situation happening around those ships and some landmarks that you put into play on the board. Additionally, the Solitaire game also comes with a second layer of play where there's a strategic map of a star sector where you have to place resources, evacuate the population, and get away from the aliens that are encroaching, that kind of stuff. But even outside of that, as a multiplayer game, Afterglow, to kind of sum up, it's space combat, very few games, So to sum up with Afterglow, it's a space combat skirmish game, far future, very fast-paced, prediction-based, and there's no randomizers. So your choices are what make you win or lose here entirely. Well, and I guess to some degree what your opponent does. It uses a timer. It doesn't have to, but I strongly recommend it. But it's just something different in the realm of space combat instead of ships slowly coasting by each other and blasting each other with broadsides. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit different, plays like nothing else that I've played. So if you're looking for something a little bit different to do with your spaceship miniatures, or if you don't have miniatures and you just want to play with tokens, the game comes with plenty of token sheets. You can play with just that. Check it out over on War Game Vault. Again, my name is Andy. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. My website and everything is all linked in the description. Thanks for watching.